As much as we like to talk about the Jews as a singular people in the ancient world for their belief in one God, that wasn't initially the case. Judaism is the product of thousands of years of gradual evolution, and the version practiced in the early Davidic period would not only be unrecognizable to religious Jews today, but actively heretical. I mentioned in the last episode that the earliest mentions of the House of David depict a steady decline from an apex of power and prestige that has otherwise been lost to history. It's hard to make exact dates, but most of this decline seems to have taken place during the reign of King Jehoram in the mid-9th century BCE. Toward the end of his reign, around 842, Edom successfully fought for its independence from Judah. Very shortly after, perhaps even the same year, Philistine raiders killed King Jehoram and kidnapped most of his family, with the notable exception of his wife Athaliah and his youngest son Ahaziah. A year after that, Israel invaded Judah and killed Ahaziah, leaving Athaliah as queen regnant, at which point Moab successfully revolted. The Bible will tell you that this is because Athaliah was an Israelite princess, and that's true. The Bible will also tell you that she was responsible for bringing the cult of Baal into Judah. This is a very convenient lie, because Jews at this point had been worshipping Baal just as long as everyone else in the region. At this time, the Israelites and the Jews practiced basically the same religion as the Phoenicians, with a handful of core gods that everyone would have known, and idiosyncratic local gods for each tribe or city-state, like Chemosh, the god of Moab who supposedly inspired their rebellion against Judah. This understanding of local gods is especially helpful to explaining the division between Israel and Judah. The most important god in the Israelite pantheon, or the Elohim, was El, or El Elyon, literally the highest god, to whom the Israelites were commanded to make animal and grain sacrifices on top of Mount Gerizim in the city of Samaria. This common belief in El Elyon is what kept the tribes of Israel united, and ultimately what kept Judah out of the fold, because as far as the Jews were concerned, the true identity of El Elyon was their local god. This might not seem like a big deal now, but each god had its own hereditary priesthood, so for Judah to have a separate clan dedicated to the worship of everyone else's most important god would always set the Jews apart as off-brand Israelites. This is why Israel invaded Judah in support of Athaliah. It's also why it was so easy for the Jewish high priest to simply assassinate her and replace her with her 7-year-old stepson. And it worked! For the better part of a century, Judah was able to stop the bleeding and restabilize. A lot of people who read the Bible for the first time as adults seem to take special notice of the fact that the high priests were usually either corrupt or incompetent, but their power structure kept Judah unified and stable. Compare that to Israel, where Manasseh had to constantly compete for dominance with 9 other tribes. And with that, now we can talk about Baal. In 760 BCE, Israel was struck by a massive magnitude 8 earthquake. And yeah, if the tribal balance of power was precarious before, things are about to get really messy. In the course of rebuilding the kingdom, a competition emerged between the cult of El and the cult of Baal. Baal was already on his way to becoming top god in the Phoenician city-states because he was the god of rain, which is hugely important to the Mediterranean, where rainfall only comes during half the year and one bad winter can topple entire nations. I mean, how do you think the Arab Spring started? As the generic creator god, El wasn't seen as having an active role in the world, so he got more and more sidelined in Israelite society. He was still there and had his share of defenders, but increasingly, those defenders weren't priests. 2 years before the earthquake, a common Jewish farmer named Amos left his home country to preach against the Israelite king Jeroboam II at his summer palace in Bethel, and in the process became the first historically verifiable Jewish prophet. It's hard to overstate how revolutionary Amos's views really were. Forget Baal, he said. El is the only god who matters because he's the one who made a contract with Israel. Israel literally means struggles with El, and Israel was breaking that contract through its immoral treatment of the poor. At this time, the Israelite religion was based solely on rituals and laws. The idea of proactive charity as an act of faith was totally alien, so the Israelites were really keen on Amos to leave. But then the earthquake happened, and instead Amos started gaining followers. Some of them were from Israel, but most were Jews who moved north after the quake, and the most important of these was Isaiah, or rather first Isaiah, because only about half the work attributed to him in the Bible was written in his lifetime, and you should get used to that. Isaiah began his ministry about 20 years after Amos, by which time Judah had become a vassal of the resurgent Assyrian Empire while Israel remained in shambles. Isaiah is mostly popular with Christians because of his so-called apocalyptic prophecies, which seem to correlate with the life of Jesus. But Isaiah was reflecting his own time with the belief that, hey, Assyria might be dominant now, but if Judah becomes a just and fair kingdom, it'll become the great power of the region, and Israel can join in. Did I mention that Israel and Judah were enemies at this time? Judah, in fact, had just teamed up with Assyria to subdue Israel. Israel revolted 2 years later, only to have its government dissolved and a sizable chunk of its population forcibly removed by the Assyrians. This forcibly removed population is commonly known as the 10 Lost Tribes, which is weird on a few levels. For one, the Northern Kingdom had 9 tribes, not 10. For two, only the Israelite elite were ever forced into exile. If you want to see modern-style ethnic cleansing, you'll have to wait until the Roman period. For earlier civilizations, conquering a country is pointless without people to work the land, and no empire existed yet that was big enough to replace a conquered native population, so for most Israelites, life continued on as before, albeit under much greater cultural influence from both Assyria and Judah, most notably reflected in the steady replacement of Hebrew as the common language with Aramaic, as well as the rapid decline of the much-loathed cult of Baal. And thirdly, a huge number of Israelite elites who heeded the prophets evaded exile and instead settled in Judah, where our story will continue next time. Hey, thanks for checking out my latest video. If you want to help the channel grow, you can always donate on my Patreon page or simply like, share, and subscribe. Today's background image is the Samaritan Temple at Mount Gerizim. I'll see you next time.